Okay, today I have the great opportunity to talk to somebody that I was introduced to by Julian Bale, who has been interviewed before for the podcast. He mentioned this woman, Coralie Diatkine, and said that she was pretty interesting in the work she did. So he gave me her contact information and her website, and I went to the website and I just had a lot of fun. I always know that something's going to work when I go to somebody's website and it just comes up several times over the course of a couple of days. There was a lot of interesting stuff. There's a story apparently that needs to be told, I think, and so we're going to dive into that a little bit. But with that, we're going to say hi to Coralie. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Darwin. I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for doing this. It's fantastic to have you on the podcast and have you be a part of this discussion.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work. I really appreciate that.
Sure. So let's start off by having you talk a little bit about your work. Why don't you describe your work to people first?
Okay, so I should probably start by just describing myself a little bit. I think everybody has their own prospect and their own history, but so I'm from a very academic and classical musical background initially, and I think that probably has a huge influence over my goals and my prospects, the way I approach the work, in a positive and maybe sometimes a little maybe negative way, in the sense that it can be very structuring, but maybe sometimes too much. So I try to forget about it a little. So I was trained in a conservatory. I studied violin and piano from the age of 5, music theory in France, in a very French way. At some point, when I grew up, I had this kind of rejection of this background, which was not very, in phase with my own background. So I started, playing rock and noisy things, noisy pop and things in my garage with my friends. I played guitar and drums, and then I got to touch to analog synths like Moogs and that kind of tool, and I think that's the first step that led me to be interested in sound textures and approaching synthesis in a very naive way, because at the time I was like 14 or something.
Right.
So I tried to understand, and I think I was a little frustrated because most of my friends and also myself we were not trying to be systematic, and we were not scientific in our approach of things. It was just fun,
Right.
But I really enjoyed so much analog sound. I really loved it because we would plug the synths on, tube amps, and we would also play on instruments and guitars. So it would have this very warm sound. Very organic, and I think that's something that made me enjoy electronic music, probably. So to get back to the path I followed, then I was not really encouraged into music. So at some point, I kept on doing studies in the humanity field, but I was not very happy with that. So I went back to the conservatory after I got my A level, and then I kept on following that academic path, in the sense that I loved singing. I really loved that. So I studied lyric singing, but on the other hand, it was not enough for me. So I did electroacoustic and a bit of computer-assisted music too in the conservatory. So in France, France is a country where in most places access is not really given to programming.
Right.
Be it through code or through graphic interfaces. I had I was lucky enough to be in Paris at the time, and one of my teachers was a member of IRCAM, and he was a composer, and he was a lot into music speculation, but applied to code. So he would introduce us to C sound, that kind of stuff, which was very seldom at the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I was ready to understand that. I was still very young, but it was still connected to the traditional approach of composition, really. And then I got into lyric singing. I started following that path. I did musicology studies and all. And at some point, when I was still a singer, I had to stop singing for reasons that are not very interesting. But and I had to think of, okay, what do I want to do? And I thought with that, the background I had, that implied, musicology, composition, orchestration, psychoacoustics. I thought, okay, why wouldn't I try to be a sound designer? And at the time, I didn't see me as an artist, as strange as it might be. So I thought, okay, I have to do something that involves my knowledge of sound,
Right.
that allows me to be creative, that allows me to think about what I'm doing, but on the other hand, to be very like an architect, like
It's structured, yeah.
yeah, like an engineer, structured. Because I was kind of scared of the craziness that lies behind the artistic work, which I had the opportunity to experiment myself. When I wrote music, I could become very, very disorganized and messy, and have these ideas that would invade my mind, and I would have issues to canalize that stuff. And also, once I would have written a piece, would it be electroacoustic or instrumental, I would feel really surprised and a bit confused about the fact that, the object you produce doesn't really belong to you anymore.
Right.
And you don't expect, you hear what you've been doing and you think, okay, should I be happy or not? And it's not a matter of having an audience that is, satisfied or thrilled or whatever. It's really something personal.
Sure.
I went back to studies like only 5 years ago. What I'm telling you about happened a few years ago only. I had no idea about Max MSP. I only knew that some people that in my conservatory, when I did electroacoustic studies, would use that stuff, but then it was like probably in 2005.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I did 1 year of sound design studies in Paris, near Paris, and I started using PD a little bit, but it was not very structured, and it was the teaching was not very systematic. So it was interesting, but I felt I wouldn't have a clear understanding of the subject. So I that was my first step, and then I finished my MA in Belfast at SARC. Sonic Art Research Centre, which is part of Queen's University Belfast. And then I had this very intense teaching about Max MSP. And that's how I got to use Max MSP. That's how I got actually to go back to Sonic Arts and to produce works that were not sound design works. They were real, even though they were, academic things that were short, etc. They were strictly, musical pieces, I would say.
Right.
In between, I did work as a sound designer in the industry in France before I went to Belfast, and I would also have to use Max MSP for my sound design at a very basic level, I would say, and it was fun. But I would still, I was very methodic, very organized, very structured. But I had this very personal approach of sound, I think. Not having an academic background, I've been a lyric singer. I sang early music. I listened to pieces that could be, Middle Ages, from Middle Ages to I don't know, Radiohead, electronic music like Kraftwerk or Japanese noise and
right.
Japanese traditional music, So my background is a bit weird. So I don't come from the mainstream, and I think you can hear it in the things I do. I try to experiment. I'm interested in micro intervals, psychoacoustics. So I try things that might not sound really appealing at first, and then I try to use my own taste to go to something to reach something that is more musical.
Sure, that makes. First of all, that really rings true when you listen to your work. I mean, your work has got a very interesting sound to it. And also, one of the things that I liked from looking at your website is that you sort of are not scared to show your experiments, right?
Yeah.
You're willing to say, here's something I'm trying out. Have a listen. I think that that's actually really important. And it's a thing artists oftentimes want to hide things until their ideas maybe, they think they've completely finished or they've completely blossomed. And I think it's really cool that you've kind of offered us a glimpse into some of the things that you're trying out.
Yeah, maybe it's because I don't see myself as completely as an artist, but also as a designer. I wouldn't even say sound designer. I would say as a designer.
Right.
I'm someone who has questions. You probably think of the stuff I posted about 3D audio, and
yes.
It was part of my MA project. So there was a lot of thinking, a lot of research involved behind. And so maybe it's also because I was asked, to clarify things, to explain my approach, and to show that I have this rigor, this this seriousness about what I do.
Right.
So I'm more on that side of things. I would say, like, maybe I always feel I have something to prove in terms of professionalism, I would say.
Right.
And I think it's just me. Maybe if I keep on evolving, maybe in 5 years I would be hiding things too. Maybe I won't talk about my work anymore. But that's something I like doing because I think it's interesting. And there is this saying, it's very, very banal, but it's not the result that matters, it's the path.
Right.
I think I think it's true. And there is a painter, maybe that you might know, who is called Richter. He's very, the things he does are close to photography. It's kind of realistic, but it's very beautiful. And he talks a lot about the way he works and his failures. And also, I think, and I think that's interesting too. I mean, it depends on the people. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for people outside of the practice, what it does is it kind of humanizes that connection. It makes you feel like you almost have a personal investment in seeing them succeed, which is maybe why I found your descriptions of what you do so compelling.
Thanks.
Now I have some questions though, based on what you kind of just told me about, because some of the things that you talk about actually, first of all, they ring really, really true to me and really close to the way I feel. And one of those things is when you talked about stuff, you talked about, first of all, art seeming to be a messy thing, but that you have a desire to be a more structured person, or a person who takes on things more systematically. Do you think that there's any kind of conflict between trying to be systematic when you're also trying to work in an experimental field?
No, I don't. I think there is some kind of dialectic. It could be a conflict if you approach it in a way that is not. I think it takes time in life to reach the stage where it's not. It doesn't create any conflict anymore. I think a structure is something that we all need at various levels.
Right.
When it takes too much space, it's a problem. But I think that when structure it's like the roots, it's strong, it's there. And some people have been lucky enough, to get these structures when they were kids. It's like kids who study code, when now they do it very young, which was not my case.
Right.
And I'm not from a scientific background. I mean, I'm a pure, I'm a poor product of humanities. So I studied acoustics and stuff, but much later. I mean, I did a lot of maths, but only a few years ago. So, and composition, for instance, I mean, I got very strong structures because I went to conservatory as a kid.
Right.
So music, I mean, the tradition of Occidental music is there. And it also gives me tools to understand music that are not Occidental, but that have these structures, such as Japanese music or gamelan music or these things. I completely agree that there are different approaches. I mean, if you think of Cage, if you think of these people, but still, I mean, if even though these people have invented their own language, I mostly refer to people that are dead now because they have built this huge work, so it's easier to think about it. But
Yeah, these people set the framework that we're able to use, right?
yeah, so they are very free. Like Stockhausen,
Yes.
he went to study with Messiaen, and Messiaen told him, "I can't teach you anything. Like you don't need me, And like he worked on serialism in a very, very systematic way. And on the other hand, like he had these ideas that were so beautiful and original and mystic. So I think if you are, it's a bit like, I think it's a bit like Zen art. It's about doing a lot of work, preparatory work, and repeating things a lot of times, And once it's there, it's in you. You produce the work and you stop thinking. And I think that's when imagination, takes power. And it doesn't have to be something chronological, It can be two processes that can be either like one follows the other, or they can be parallel, But I think the brain needs these two things. Like you build something that is very structured, and it can be almost like unconscious, And then you produce your work. And when you produce, you stop thinking about these things. So everybody has a way to get this structure. It can be, when you're young, or it can be all your life. I don't know, but it shouldn't be a conflict, I think.
Well, it's interesting you say it that way, because one of the things that I've noticed is that people who've grown up and studied in France, when they talk about their background, it's a very, and especially in your case, you went down this very academic and very conservatory-based system, and France is pretty well known for having a pretty serious and very formal bureaucracy behind going through those kind of studies, right?
Yes, very, very, yeah.
But I also find that some of the people who are willing to take interesting and thoughtful approaches to how they approach art, and specifically music. It seems to really be focused on music and sound. That there are some of the most adventurous people I know are the product of that very formal system, even though at some point you have to sort of like escape the formalism to create the completely new work. And I think what you just told me kind of helps explain that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, in France, the thing is that we attract a lot of foreigners. I know many people who went to the conservatory, and who did composition studies and who are now famous composers, Most of them are Italians. Some of them that I know are Chinese, Japanese. I don't know any German, because I think the German are very, very good at, teaching music. Same for the English. But what I mean is that France is good at, it has still very strong institutions that have a very, very strong reputation. So we draw a lot of foreigners. But so what I know from Italian composers, for instance, is that they get a very, very strong academic training in a counterpoint, harmony, and it gives them that kind of stability. And then these guys they have a, and it's not just men, it's also women. They have this very, very strong culture, traditional culture. They know a lot about fine arts. They know a lot about myths. They have this very strong Latin culture for most of them, but it doesn't prevent them then from imagining things and extrapolating things out of a very organized languages.
Right.
And it's the same about code, it's the same about be it code be it written or not. It has a very strong logic. It's a language, but it is well built, and the fact that it is a language that is very well built and that is versatile and metaphorical, that the idea of the metaphor is very strong. It allows you to build things out of just data,
Right.
If your mind is structured enough to use that, the power of language at any level, and the fact that data is just data, then if you have enough imagination, it allows you to really develop things that no one would have thought of before. I think it makes it really, really that's what makes it so thrilling and so enthusiastic. So stimulating. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the metaphor, because that was the next place I was going to go, but the concept of the metaphor actually really explains it. My question was going to be, you describe sort of the French formalism as being tied to a language. It's like the language of counterpoint or the language of harmony or
Yes.
whatever. And so often whenever we learn any language, we tend to think within the framework of that language, right? And that language kind of describes how we're going to think. But what you just stated, which is this concept of the metaphor, is actually one of the ways that we're able to break free of the limits of a language, right? And so where I was going to ask, how do you get away from the language that formalism provides? You actually gave me the answer already, which is this concept that the metaphor allows you to sort of like shoot beyond what the basic language might tell you.
Yes, and I think I think it's the fact that when you think of what data is that data is just numbers, it's just figures, and it's a relationship between the figures and the numbers. And so that you can interpret it the way you want, Then it comes to choices that you make and things you want to talk about, know. And that is not related with language. It's related with one's life. What do I want to talk about? So of course there are recurrences and there are leitmotifs I'm thinking mostly of art science projects. It's about earthquakes and stars and biological phenomena and stuff. And yeah, it's very exciting. And I think it might be a trend, but I think if one takes a bit of time to really go and be introspective about what makes one vibrate, you can find other things to talk about. But still, that's a parenthesis. The thing is, when you code, when you use an interface, whatever, you have this language, okay? You have to use a language, but the fact that it's processes and data, and that you can apply these things to any media, such as sound or image, and that you can create relationship between the media, that you can create interactions, etc. It gives you so much flexibility that there is no excuse for having no ideas, I would say, or being banal or sounding like anyone, because you have so many options. You have to choose an option, but you have so many options that it's a way to be free. But still you have the language, you have the constraints, you can give yourself constraints, and that's what is nice about it,
Right. One of the things that when people are confronted with the opportunity to have so many options, sometimes people get frightened. Sometimes they get worried that they've chosen the wrong option, or that they're running down the wrong path. How do you get beyond that? How do you?
I only started getting beyond it a few days ago, actually. And I'm not even sure I have, but it's a question that you might, think about any event in life.
Right.
And actually, life is the answer. I mean, I tried, to make the right choice all the time. And what I realized is that I just have to meet someone randomly, have a discussion that was completely unexpected, and then it's going to make me make a decision.
Right.
And there is nothing I can do about it. So that's me. But still, I mean, joke being apart, that joke apart, I think there is time for trying to assess and evaluate and make the choices. But at some point, you make the decision. And that is something that is related to things that are very hard to explain. And you have to accept it. It's easy to say, but there is no right choice. Well, I think that's true. There are necessities and there are things that are there to guide you and that you can't really understand. But you can also try and take the time to really think, okay, what what are the things I want to experiment about that I don't know? What are the things that I am comfortable with and that I really want to develop because I know I'm good at those? And then it probably can help you make the choices we're talking about. For instance, the project I'm working on at the moment is a project that I have in mind, like it's built upon many, many different aspects of my life, of encounters I made, of interests I have in music and science. I managed somehow to give it some sort of coherence, but it's just because I'm good at, trying to assemble these things together.
Right.
It could be completely heteroclite and weird, but actually it's not. And that's because I've decided I wanted to give it that coherence.
Right.
So, your question was, how do I get beyond, not making the right choice? It's just because my life has put me into a position where I had to make choices in situations of emergency. Like, when I lost my voice, what do I do? Okay, and I made this decision like 10 minutes. When I was in the UK, everybody was playing music but me. I've been a musician since I was 5. I was a singer, I couldn't sing, and I would see people playing, and I was miserable. And I remember I was lying in bed waiting to fall asleep, and the sentence came into my mind: you take a saxophone, And in the morning after, I was taking a saxophone, and I was taking my next lesson the day after, and I haven't stopped playing since then. And I play 2 hours a day, and I've never felt so happy about that. And I can't explain why the saxophone. Yeah, it's something vocal, whatever. But like, it's an instrument I had never played. I love the sound. I know sax players, etc. I could have, decided to keep on singing at some point, or start again, whatever. I said no. I want to play the saxophone. Now I'm improvising with the saxophone. I'm working on a patch to work on electronic and saxophone, right. and I'm getting to play with people, and I can't explain that, and that's perfectly okay,
Yeah. Do you mind telling us why you stopped? I mean, after the way you talk about having studied and performed with voice, it's clear that at one point that really represented your path to the future, and then you stopped. Do you mind telling us why you stopped?
It's very. I don't mind talking about it. It's just that I don't know if people would be interested in knowing about that. But I don't know if you've tried to sing. I mean, not like songs that you sing with your friends, but using a technique that is kind of lyric or whatever. But it involves a lot of physical strength. It implies being very physically in shape and confident, and not overthinking things, and not wondering too much about what you're doing. And when you're on a stage, no matter how much you've worked, when you get on the stage, you see those people looking at you, and they look at you in a way that is not the same way as they would look at a player, an instrumentalist. Right. There is something about voice that gives you power. It's scary. It really is, especially when you're a solo singer. I've had the opportunity to do a few premieres and to sing as a solo singer. And even though I felt I was not ready for that, people would come talk to me after that, and they would, tell me things that I was completely unaware of, and they would pay attention to things that are related with what you are and not with what you do. And that's really weird. So, you feel you have the power over the people, and that's something I really didn't like. Also, singers have an ego. They have to have an ego. They have to love themselves. And I think at the time, I was not really into that. I was very self-critical. I have a very good ear, I'm very focused on technique. So that was my concern, like singing well. And not be into acting or be into just displaying my skills and feeling so proud about what I was doing. It happened. I stopped singing when I had the perfect opportunity. I was about to go to Stuttgart Conservatory to finish my course of studies. I was about to meet excellent teachers, like people that were so good and so positive and so encouraging. And I just felt probably just too inconfident, too critical. And there's something about this background of singing, like especially in France, which is very conservative, full of people that are very full of themselves, which is probably not the case in Germany. Like, for instance, in Stuttgart, they told me, you like electronic music, but we offer a class for singers who want to learn about that. And I was like, wow, okay, that's impossible in France.
Right.
When you're a singer in France, like, you wear a silk dress, high heel shoes, and you have to look completely, things haven't changed since the end of the 19th century for singers. I mean,
right.
In a very stereotypical way. There are singers in France that are brilliant, who love contemporary music and stuff, but there are exceptions.
Right.
So I had an inner conflict about the way I perceived the background of singing. I didn't feel I had a place there. And I was not expecting that people would give me the chance to do that, to do my own thing as a singer in Stuttgart. And I felt I didn't deserve that, probably. And I just got scared. And then I didn't even, lose my voice or whatever. I just kept on getting sore throats, couldn't stop, and I couldn't do the entrance competition. I was also a bit uncertain about my chances to get there and to make it. But the fact that I kept on being sick was the main problem. And I did actually my best concert after being sick like that. I was in pain. I did the best concert I ever did, and I never recovered. Like, for 3 months, I was not able to say a word. I went to see doctors. They would tell me, your voice is perfect. There is nothing wrong. And I think my body would just say stop. My body didn't want it anymore. I was just miserable. And then it took me a while. I started taking lessons again. The pain would still be there, but people would tell me, yeah, your voice is so beautiful. You have to do it, etc. And I was basically like, yeah, whatever, it's useless, etc. And at some point I thought, okay, I'm not recovering, so I have to do something else. Right. And then what's funny is that I noticed I was in my shower the other day, and I started singing because I felt happy, and I noticed my voice is still there. It's even better than before because I play the saxophone. And I could, think, yeah, I should take lessons again. But no, I mean, it's past, and I know I can do it. I know it's there, but it's not me anymore.
Right. Well, it's actually interesting because I went through a similar path with the guitar as my main instrument. Right. When I studied guitar very seriously at a university. Again, what started happening, very similar to you, it's like my body tried to defeat my mind, right? It's like, because guitar is a very physical instrument, and it has some of the same issues that you talk about with singing. I think any instrument has the potential for having people that are full of themselves, but guitar especially was sort of like, the standing on stage and grimacing and acting like the center of attention is sort of like the antithesis of what I'm comfortable with anyway. And I ran into situations where my body seemed to want to defeat my ability to succeed on the instrument. And at the time I was almost unwilling to listen to what my body was saying, right? I was like, no, I have to get over this. I have to power through this. But, subsequently what led me to focus on more electronic music, because since there wasn't this physical nature to it, it allowed me to be more intellectual and less physical about the work. And I think I appreciate that. Now, recently I've started working with the guitar again, but this is after many, many years, and I'm glad I'm able to do it again. Similarly, it's interesting that you have approached the saxophone, which is a very vocal and kind of lyrical instrument. So it seems like you would be able to bring some of the sensibilities of being a vocalist into being a saxophonist. Does that feel like it's the case?
Probably. The thing is, I think the fact I learned saxophone abroad My first teacher, and I want to say his name because I think you might know him, and he's not just a sax player. He's called Adnan Marquez Borbon.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
from Mexico, but when he speaks, he's got this accent from the States because he spent a lot of his time in the States.
Right.
He's an improviser and he does a lot of electronic music too. And he gave me like 2-3 lessons. And the thing is, it's the kind of person who has the good approach. There was nothing but, okay, I'm going to show you how to do. There is no it's hard, it's easy, whatever. It's just facts. Here is how you do it. He was not overdoing it. He was not like congratulating me every 5 minutes. He was not trying to be a bit sadistic, like some teachers can be.
Right.
And I think if I had teachers like this since I learned music as a child, I would have had a completely different prospect on music. So the thing about being lyrical, I think, is something I can do. I think I would do it in a way that doesn't involve my ego. I think I can do it in a way that I'm just a medium.
Right, right.
I'm expressing personal things, but there is no pride about it. I'm just standing there, and I guess now if I had to sing, I would do the same thing. But at the time when I was a singer, I wouldn't have done it that way. I would have been, judging myself and wondering, I am singing a love song, and so it's about love, and what is love? It's about... No, I think now I would do it completely differently. Like, for instance, there is one of the first piece I learned as a sax player is, and I chose it myself, My One and Only Love. It's a song that Coltrane did with a singer, and I don't really like vocal jazz, actually.
Yeah.
But this song is obvious. It's a ballad, and it's very beautiful. I remember I was so surprised because, I'm a young player. I'm not able to play anything. But I was able to play it with all my heart, but without shame and with great simplicity, And that's what I learned with saxophone and with the guys I had the opportunity to meet. And probably it's because also they are jazz players, It's a different approach to music when you're a jazz player, because you learn music in a very, it's very structured, but you learn how to improvise, you learn the language, you learn how to be responsible for what you do. It's not like in the conservatory when you learn an instrument. And I also teach music, so, I see kids who have lessons in the conservatory, and I know how music is taught in conservatories. It's not the right approach at all. So they don't learn how to be responsible for what they do. They don't learn how to be sincere and true, and yet having the comments in the end. They are just people who try to apply a technique and perform a piece the best way they can, but they don't understand what they do. They don't understand the structure of the piece. They don't understand the intentions. They don't understand the aesthetics, whatever. And when you learn jazz, when you learn how to play jazz, that's the opposite.
Right.
Like, you have to understand the aesthetics. You most of the time, who was Coltrane, who was Miles Davis, who are these people, about Lester Young and why he evolved the way he did,
Mm-hmm.
So about the players, the musicians, you know about the language, and you are asked to improvise very early. With all that, I don't think ego has a lot of space. I don't think.
Right.
Well, that's my assumption.
That's
Maybe.
very, very interesting. That's an interesting view on it. I hadn't thought of it quite in that way, but that's an important view of it. Now, I'm curious, you have a number of sort of like parallel lines that you're pursuing or exploring or learning more about. How are you planning? What is your imagination for how you're going to combine your electronic music studies, your work with the saxophone, your history with very conservative and classical musics, but also your interest in experimentalism? How do you combine all these into the work of the future? What's the thing that you're looking at now as being kind of the thing that brings these things together?
I think it's not very complicated, and I've never really had to formalize it. But as you ask me,
now you have to, right?
Yeah, but it's not so complicated actually. I could probably say, well, I'm going to forget about composition because I don't have the time, and I don't have the time. But I'm not able to. I'm going to forget about this for a while and focus on, just electronic music, whatever. But there are things I see on the long term, and there are things I see on the short term. Right now, I'm working on an installation, and it kind of, maybe it's a bit naive, or maybe it's not the right way to see it, but I tend to try and gather most of the things I know and implement them in a work. But it's also because to me, it's all one coherent project. So I'm working on an installation that involves a lot of things I'm interested in about microintervals, perception, and composition, but also physical modeling, and it has a lot of, it's mostly based on Max MSP, also libraries that tools that are used for physical modeling, and that have been integrated under the form of libraries for Max, so it's very convenient. There is interaction involved with Boids, and it's a project that I've had in mind since a few years now, and that now I have to now put my hands in the dirt and really produce sounds and implement it. So installation, I think, is a very interesting media because it allows me to think in terms of composition and also but at the level of electronic music. Perception, I think, is a very strong thing. It's something I studied in the conservatory when I was studying singing at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I work on a solo, on a saxophone solo project. On one hand, I put a great deal of great care in being able to improvise without anything else but my saxophone. So I still have this approach of questioning the language itself. But also I'm thinking of electronics, but in a way that makes sense for a saxophone. Like I base myself on tools that allow to analyze the sound of the saxophone in terms of perception again. I am still focused on the same things in the saxophone as a tool for sax and electronics as the things you would find in my installation. So I would work on very limited areas of sound, such as microintervals, textures, that like roughness. There is a difference between sax and installations, of course, but the themes I tackle are quite similar. I have started again taking composition classes, so it's strange, but so I take a pen and a paper, and really I've started back to where I was when I was a teenager, basically. And I have the aim, and I know that will take time, so I'm thinking on the long term. My aim is to be able to master again the techniques of counterpoint, and I'm really thinking of like Middle Ages and Renaissance, because they would do things that were incredible at the time. Right. So when I have time, I still read Bach choral music, and I really hope that I am strong enough in a few years to be able to write contemporary music that is just based on, the pen and the paper, but also apply the language to processes that could be and that need electronic to be implemented. And that's more a long-term project that I have. So that's it. And teaching is probably the perfect way for me to think of all these projects together. Because when I teach music, I have wonderful young or adult students that really tell me a lot about myself, and that they really make me feel like teaching new things. So I think I could, teach counterpoint and harmony to kids, and that would probably, make me feel more confident about writing music. So, yeah, and I intend also to teach electronic music to children who are like piano players, or, but because in France, it's very seldom that children are given the opportunity to code, and especially if they are not in a scientific background. Like when you're a musician in France, you're just a musician.
Right. No creative coding, right?
Yeah. And it's like only been a few, like 2, 3, 5, 5 years maybe that musicians in the conservatory have the possibility to do a PhD. You can't do a PhD otherwise. I mean, if you're a musician, it doesn't exist.
Oh. Well, this sounds amazing. It sounds like you're putting together a remarkable future. And man, there's like 4 other things I was hoping to talk to you about. We'll have to save it for another time, though, because our time is up.
Okay.
Coralie, I want to thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you and getting to know not only more about you, but more about your thought processes and how you think your way through some of these issues is really quite fascinating.
Thanks. I didn't expect that, and it was very interesting. It's nice. You gave me the opportunity to think about what I do. It's really nice.
Well, great.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, and we will hopefully talk again soon.
Yes, well, thank you, and have a nice evening.
Same.
Oh, well, nice day.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Many thanks to Coralie for spending the time talking with us. Really interesting to hear how her brain works and how she thinks about organization and language and how she likes combining things together to make great wholes. Very interesting stuff. I want to thank you, the listener, for continuing to tune in and keeping it to the ground. Pretty soon I'm going to be providing you with some information on some releases that I might be doing. So hopefully that comes together. If it does, you'll be the first to hear about it. Thanks a lot, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.